The rain tapped softly against the windshield as Officer Nia Brooks sat alone in her car outside the station. In her lap rested an old photograph, its edges worn from years of being folded and unfolded. The picture showed a younger man in uniform, smiling beside a little girl holding his hand. Her father. Nia brushed her thumb across the image before slipping it back into her pocket. Today was supposed to feel like a victory. After 15 years of service, countless night shifts, and sacrifices nobody saw, she was starting at a new department. Most people would have felt proud. Nia felt something closer to uncertainty. She looked at the brick building ahead. The station stood under gray morning clouds, its windows glowing with warm yellow light. Officers moved in and out of the front entrance, carrying coffee cups and paperwork. A few laughed together near the door. For a moment, she stayed in her car and watched. The smell of rain drifted through a small crack in the window. It reminded her of another morning many years ago when her father had driven her to school before heading to his own shift. He had always said the same thing before leaving. "Treat people right, Nia. The badge means nothing if you forget the people behind it." She still carried those words with her. Taking a slow breath, she picked up her bag and stepped out into the rain. Water splashed beneath her shoes as she walked toward the station. Nobody paid much attention to her. Inside, conversations filled the lobby. Phones rang, printers hummed, officers moved quickly between desks. A few glanced at her before looking away. To them, she was just another transfer officer. Nobody knew her story. Nobody knew what she had accomplished, and none of them knew that by the end of the week, everything inside that station would change. Before we continue, where are you watching from today? Nia's first day began the same way many new beginnings do, with polite smiles that never quite reached people's eyes. A receptionist pointed her toward a briefing room at the end of the hallway. The scent of coffee and old paper filled the air as she walked through the station. Framed photographs covered the walls. Retired officers, award ceremonies, community events. Years of history lived inside those frames. When Nia entered the briefing room, conversation softened for a moment. About a dozen officers sat around a long table. Some nodded politely, others barely looked up. A tall officer with silver hair leaned back in his chair and glanced at her uniform. "You the transfer from Chicago?" he asked. "That's right," Nia replied. He nodded once. "Heard Chicago's rough." Nia offered a small smile. "It can be." The man introduced himself as Sergeant Rick Lawson. 28 years on the force, well-respected, well-known. The kind of officer whose opinion carried weight throughout the building. At least, that was the impression she got. Lawson pointed toward an empty seat. Nia sat quietly and listened as the morning briefing began. Calls were assigned, schedules were discussed. The normal rhythm of police work unfolded around her. Yet something felt strange. Not openly hostile, not obvious. Just small things. People speaking over her. Questions directed to everyone except her. Conversations ending when she approached. Tiny moments that individually meant nothing. Together, they told a different story. During lunch, Nia sat alone in the break room. She didn't mind solitude. Police work had taught her that loneliness often came with the job. Still, she couldn't ignore the feeling that she was being measured, judged, tested. The break room door opened. 3 officers entered carrying food. One of them glanced at Nia. "That's the new officer." His voice wasn't exactly quiet. The others looked her over briefly. "Wonder how long she'll last here." A few chuckles followed. Nia continued eating. She had heard worse throughout her career. Far worse. Being a black woman in law enforcement meant learning early that some people decided who you were before you ever spoke a word. She learned not to waste energy fighting every assumption. Time usually handled that for her. Across the room, an older janitor named Walter pushed a cleaning cart through the doorway. Unlike everyone else, he greeted her warmly. "Afternoon, officer." "Afternoon," Walter smiled. "First day? Is it that obvious?" He laughed softly. "Only because everybody keeps looking at you." Nia couldn't help smiling. Walter lowered his voice. "Give it time. Folks around here don't warm up quickly." "Good to know." As he left, he paused. "You seem like one of the good ones." Then he disappeared down the hallway. The simple comment stayed with her longer than she expected. Because kindness often mattered most when it appeared unexpectedly. Over the next few days, Nia settled into her routine. Patrol, reports, community calls. Traffic stops. Nothing unusual. But the atmosphere inside the station continued bothering her. One afternoon, she responded to a call involving an elderly man who had become confused while walking home. The situation could have easily escalated. Instead, Nia spent nearly an hour helping him contact family members and safely return home. The man's daughter arrived in tears. Before leaving, she hugged her father tightly. Then she turned toward Nia. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You treated him with dignity." Nia smiled. He deserved it. The daughter never forgot that moment. Neither did the people watching from nearby. Word traveled. Community members began recognizing Nia. Store owners greeted her. Residents stopped to thank her. People trusted her, not because she wore a badge, because they felt seen. Inside the station, however, attitudes changed more slowly. Some officers respected her, others remained distant. A few seemed determined not to like her at all. One evening, during a patrol shift, Nia overheard laughter coming from the equipment room. As she stepped closer, the voices became clearer. "She's trying too hard. Probably wants a promotion. Everybody knows those transfers come in thinking they're special." More laughter followed. Nia stood quietly outside the doorway. Not angry, not surprised, just disappointed. After a moment, she turned and walked away. There was no point arguing. People revealed themselves when they thought nobody was listening. The next morning brought something unexpected. The chief announced a department-wide meeting scheduled for Friday. Mandatory attendance, no exceptions. Rumors spread immediately. Budget cuts, policy changes, retirements. Nobody seemed to know. By Thursday afternoon, speculation had become the station's favorite topic. Even Sergeant Lawson appeared curious. Friday finally arrived. The entire department gathered inside the main conference room. Officers filled every seat. Others stood against the walls. Nia entered quietly and took a place near the back. Conversations buzzed around her. Then the chief stepped forward. The room fell silent. His expression was serious, almost emotional. "Thank you all for being here," he began. "I'll keep this brief." Several officers exchanged nervous looks. The chief continued. "As many of you know, I've decided to retire." Murmurs spread through the room. Some looked shocked, others saddened. The chief raised a hand. "The city has already selected my replacement." Now the room became completely still. Everyone wanted to know who would take over. Years of careers could change depending on that answer. The chief smiled slightly. Then he looked toward the back of the room, toward Nia. For the first time all week, every eye followed his gaze. And suddenly, Nia realized the moment she had been waiting for had finally arrived. The room seemed to shrink. For a second, nobody moved, nobody spoke. The chief kept his eyes on Nia, while dozens of officers turned in their seats to look at her. Some looked confused, some looked curious. A few looked irritated. Nia remained calm. She had known this moment was coming. The city council had hired her months earlier. Until now, only a handful of people had known the truth. The arrangement had been intentional. The council wanted her to spend time inside the department before officially taking command. They wanted her to see the culture with her own eyes. The chief nodded toward her. "Captain Brooks, would you join me, please?" A heavy silence settled across the room. Nia stood. The sound of her footsteps echoed as she walked toward the front. Several officers stared openly. One officer nearly dropped his coffee. Sergeant Lawson's face had gone completely blank. The chief smiled warmly. "Many of you know Officer Nia Brooks as the transfer who joined us last week. What you may not know is that she spent 15 years serving in Chicago. She led major community programs, reduced neighborhood crime in some of the city's most difficult districts, and earned recognition from state and federal agencies." The room remained silent. "Next Monday, she will officially become the new captain of this department." Nobody laughed. Nobody whispered. The reality landed all at once. The woman many had ignored. The woman some had mocked. The woman eating lunch alone in the break room. She would soon be their commanding officer. The chief continued speaking, but Nia noticed the expressions around the room. Shock, embarrassment, disbelief. And on a few faces, concern. Because people often worried most when they realized someone had seen them exactly as they were. When the meeting ended, officers slowly filed out. Conversations erupted immediately. Nia shook hands with a few people near the front. Others avoided eye contact entirely. As she stepped into the hallway, she heard someone call her name. She turned. Sergeant Lawson stood there. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Lawson cleared his throat. "I didn't know." Nia smiled politely. "I know." He looked uncomfortable. The confidence he normally carried seemed missing. "I hope you don't think everyone here is against you." "I don't." Lawson nodded. "I'm glad to hear that." But neither of them fully believed the conversation was finished. Over the next several days, the station changed. Not completely, not overnight, but enough for Nia to notice. People suddenly greeted her. Doors were held open. Conversations became more respectful. Yet something about it felt hollow. Respect given because of a title was easy. Respect given because of character was harder. Nia knew the difference. One afternoon, she walked through the station and stopped beside Walter, the elderly janitor who had welcomed her on her first day. Walter smiled. "Looks like folks finally learned your name." Nia laughed softly. "Looks that way." Walter leaned on his broom. "Funny how some people decide who you are before they know you." His words lingered long after she walked away, because they were true. A week later, Nia officially took command. The ceremony was simple. Family members attended, community leaders came, local reporters snapped photographs. Among the guests sat a woman named Eleanor Price. Most people didn't recognize her. Nia did. Years earlier, Eleanor's son had been arrested during a difficult period in his life. Many officers had written him off as another lost cause. Nia hadn't. She had helped connect him with community programs and mentors. Today, he owned a small construction company. When the ceremony ended, Eleanor approached her. "My son wanted to come," she said. "He's working today." Nia smiled. "Tell him I said hello." Tears appeared in Eleanor's eyes. "You changed his life." Nia shook her head gently. "He changed his own life." Still, Eleanor squeezed her hand. Sometimes people never forgot who stood beside them during their worst moments. That evening, after everyone left, Nia sat alone in her new office. The building was quiet. Sunlight stretched across the floor. For the first time all day, she allowed herself to relax. Her eyes drifted toward the photograph sitting on her desk, the same picture she had carried on her first morning. Her father, the little girl holding his hand.
She picked it up carefully. "I made it, Dad."
The words barely left her lips, yet speaking them felt important. Years of sacrifice, years of long nights, years of proving herself again and again, all of it had led here. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." The door opened. To her surprise, Sergeant Lawson stepped inside. He held a small box. Nia studied him quietly. He seemed nervous, more nervous than she had ever seen him. Lawson set the box on her desk. "I wanted to give you something." "What is it?" He opened the lid. Inside sat an old silver badge, worn by time, polished by years of use. "My father's badge," Lawson said. Nia looked up, confused. Lawson took a slow breath. "He was a police officer for 30 years. Nia listened. "He taught me something when I was young." Lawson paused. The silence stretched. Then he looked directly at her. He said the easiest thing in the world is judging someone you don't know. Nia remained quiet. Lawson's eyes lowered briefly. "I forgot that." The admission seemed difficult for him, more difficult than any apology. "I wasn't fair to you." The words hung between them. Simple, honest, human. Nia could see the effort it took for him to say them, and that mattered a lot. "If I'm being honest," Lawson continued, "some of us made assumptions the moment you walked through those doors." Nia nodded. "I know. I'm sorry." For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Mia smiled, not because the hurt disappeared, not because the past week suddenly didn't matter, but because real change often begins with uncomfortable truth. "Thank you for saying that." Relief crossed Lawson's face. A small smile appeared. Then he pointed toward the badge. "My father used to say, leadership isn't about making people fear you." Mia looked at the badge. "What is it about?" Lawson smiled. "Making people better than they thought they could be." The words settled into the room, and for a moment, Nia thought about her own father, about kindness, about service, about the reason she wore the uniform in the first place. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. Because sometimes the strongest people aren't the ones who never make mistakes. They're the ones willing to admit them. Lawson headed toward the door. But before leaving, he stopped. "There's something else you should know." Nia looked up. His expression changed. The warmth disappeared. Concern replaced it. "What is it?" Lawson hesitated. Then he spoke quietly. "The problems in this department go a lot deeper than a few bad assumptions." Nia felt her stomach tighten. "What do you mean?" Lawson glanced toward the hallway to make sure nobody was listening. Then he lowered his voice. "There are things happening here that never make it into official reports." The room suddenly felt colder. "What kind of things?" Lawson looked troubled, the kind of troubled that couldn't be faked. "I think someone inside this department is hiding something." Nia stared at him. Neither moved. Neither spoke. Outside her office window, the sun slowly disappeared behind the city skyline. And for the first time since becoming captain, Nia realized the biggest challenge waiting for her wasn't winning respect. It was uncovering a secret that someone inside the station was desperate to keep buried. Nia barely slept that night. Lawson's words followed her home and stayed with her long after the city lights disappeared outside her apartment window. There was something about the way he had said it. Not dramatic, not exaggerated, just concerned. The kind of concern that came from carrying a burden too long. The next morning, Nia arrived at the station before sunrise. The hallways were quiet. A coffee machine hummed somewhere in the distance. She unlocked her office and sat at her desk. For nearly an hour, she reviewed reports from the previous year. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Traffic stops, property crimes, routine incidents. Then, small inconsistencies began appearing. Missing follow-up notes, incomplete paperwork, cases closed unusually quickly. Each issue by itself seemed minor. Together, they painted a troubling picture. Not proof, but enough to raise questions. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Walter stood in the doorway holding a paper cup. "Thought you could use some coffee." Nia smiled. "You might be my favorite person in this building." Walter chuckled and handed it over. "Don't let the others hear that." For a moment they talked about ordinary things. The weather, baseball, Walter's grandchildren. The conversation felt refreshing, simple, human. Before leaving, Walter paused. "You know, your father would be proud." Nia looked up. "You remember him?" Walter nodded. "Met him once at a conference years ago." That surprised her. He spent 20 minutes helping a young officer who was ready to quit. Walter smiled at the memory. Most people in positions of authority don't realize how much kindness matters. After he left, Nia sat quietly. Her father had never been famous, never wealthy, never powerful. Yet people still remembered how he treated them. That mattered more than any title hanging on a door. By midday, Nia requested several files related to the reports she had reviewed. The records clerk looked uncomfortable. "Some of these are archived." "That's fine." "It could take time." "I'm not in a hurry." But the reaction stayed with her. People became nervous when old records attracted attention. 3 days later, a pattern emerged. Nearly every questionable case connected to the same group of officers. Not necessarily criminal behavior, at least not yet, but enough shortcuts and missing documentation to create concern. One name appeared repeatedly: Lieutenant Darren Mills, a respected veteran officer, popular, charismatic, the kind of person nobody suspected, which made Nia even more cautious. Real life rarely announced its villains. That afternoon, she asked Lawson to join her office. When he arrived, she spread several files across the desk. Lawson studied them silently. Then he sighed. "So you found it." Nia leaned back. "You knew?" "I suspected." "Why didn't you report it?" Lawson rubbed his forehead. "Because suspicion isn't proof." The answer frustrated her, but she understood it. Police work demanded evidence, not feelings. Not assumptions, evidence. Lawson pointed toward one report. "Mills has friends everywhere." "You think he's involved?" "I think somebody is." Nia stared at the files. The room suddenly felt heavier. Because investigations became complicated when trust entered the equation. The following week brought new challenges. Rumors spread quickly through the station. People noticed Nia reviewing old records. Questions circulated. Some officers became distant again. Others appeared nervous. The atmosphere shifted. One evening, Nia found herself sitting alone in the break room. Outside, rain tapped against the windows. The same kind of rain that had greeted her on her first day. She was staring into a cup of coffee when someone entered. It was Officer Jenna Morales, one of the younger officers, quiet, hard-working, respected by the community. "Mind if I sit?" "Of course." Jenna sat across from her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Jenna reached into her pocket and placed a folded envelope on the table. Nia looked at it. "What's this?" "I think you should read it." "Why?" Jenna hesitated. Fear flickered across her face. Real fear. The kind people struggled to hide. Because somebody needs to know. Nia opened the envelope. Inside were copies of internal documents, expense records, equipment purchases, signatures. Several appeared altered. Others didn't make sense at all. Nia looked up slowly. "Where did you get these?" Jenna swallowed hard. "I found them months ago." "And you've been carrying them ever since?" Jenna nodded. "I didn't know who to trust." The honesty in her voice was unmistakable. Nia suddenly understood how alone she must have felt. Keeping a secret like that inside a police department could destroy careers, friendships, reputations. "Why bring them to me now?" Jenna looked down, then back up. "Because you're the first leader I've seen who seems more interested in what's right than who's popular." The words landed harder than she expected. Leadership often meant hearing difficult truths. Sometimes it meant becoming responsible for them. Nia carefully folded the papers. "You did the right thing." Tears appeared in Jenna's eyes, not from sadness, relief. Months of anxiety finally beginning to lift. "Thank you." As Jenna left, Nia sat alone staring at the envelope. The investigation had just become much more serious. Over the next 2 weeks, evidence accumulated. Not dramatic evidence, not movie-style revelations, just facts, numbers, documents, records. The truth arriving piece by piece. And the truth pointed toward Darren Mills. When confronted with paperwork discrepancies, Mills always had explanations. Some sounded reasonable, others didn't. But something felt wrong. Very wrong. Then came the moment that changed everything. Late one evening, Nia reviewed an old community outreach budget. A photograph slipped from a folder and landed on her desk. She picked it up. At first, it seemed ordinary, a group picture from a charity event years earlier. Then her eyes widened. There was Mills, standing beside several local business owners. Nothing unusual, until she recognized one of the faces, a contractor connected to missing department funds. Nia's heartbeat quickened. Suddenly, pieces started fitting together. Not perfectly, but enough. Enough to understand the shape of the truth. Enough to know this wasn't clerical error. This was deliberate. And someone had been hiding it for years. That night she drove home under dark skies. The city seemed quieter than usual. Her thoughts raced. Part of her felt determined. Another part felt exhausted. Leadership was supposed to be about helping people, building trust, serving communities. Yet here she was, preparing to expose corruption inside her own department. The burden felt enormous. When she arrived home, she opened a drawer beside her bed. Inside rested the photograph of her father. She sat down and looked at it. For several minutes, she said nothing. Then, she laughed softly. "You always manage to make the hard choices sound easy." The room remained silent, yet somehow she knew exactly what he would say. Do what's right, even when it's uncomfortable, especially then. The next morning, Nia requested a formal internal review. The process began immediately. Investigators arrived, financial records were secured, interviews were scheduled. The station buzzed with tension. Nobody knew exactly what was happening, but everyone knew something had changed. That afternoon, Darren Mills appeared at her office door. His face was calm, too calm. "Can we talk?" "Sure." He entered and closed the door behind him. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Mills smiled, a small, measured smile. "You know," he said, "sometimes people spend so much time looking for problems that they create them." Nia met his gaze. "And sometimes people get comfortable believing nobody's looking." The smile disappeared. The room fell silent. Neither blinked, neither backed down. For the first time since she arrived at the department, Nia felt the full weight of the battle ahead. Not a fight for authority, not a fight for respect, a fight for truth. Have you ever faced a moment when doing the right thing came with a cost? Let us know in the comments. Because some choices look simple from a distance, they feel very different when you're the one making them. As Mills turned and walked toward the door, he paused. His hand rested on the handle. Then he looked back. There are people in this department who won't forgive what you're doing. The warning hung in the air. Not loud, not threatening, just cold. After he left, Nia stared at the closed door. Outside her office window, officers moved through the parking lot as evening settled over the city. Some of them knew what was coming, some didn't. But one thing had become clear. The investigation was no longer hidden. And before it was over, someone would lose far more than a promotion. The warning stayed with Nia for days, not because it frightened her, because it felt true. When people built their lives around a version of reality, they rarely welcomed anyone who challenged it. The internal review moved forward quietly, but word spread faster than anyone expected. Conversations stopped when Nia entered a room. Groups became silent in hallways. Some officers who once greeted her warmly now avoided eye contact. Others offered support in private but remained silent in public. Fear has a way of doing that. It convinces good people to stand very still. One afternoon, Nia stood near the station entrance, watching officers leave for their shifts. The summer sun cast long shadows across the parking lot. Walter appeared beside her, carrying a box of supplies. "You look tired." Nia laughed softly. "That obvious?" Walter nodded. "You've got your father's eyes when you're worried." That caught her off guard. "My father worried?" "All the time." Nia smiled. He never showed it. Walter adjusted the box in his arms. The strongest people rarely do. For a moment, they watched the parking lot together. Then Walter spoke again. "You know why people respected your father?" Nia looked at him. "Why?" "Because he treated the janitor and the mayor exactly the same." The answer settled into her heart. Simple. True. The kind of wisdom that didn't need explaining. A week later, investigators completed their preliminary findings. The results were worse than Nia expected. Several department contracts had been manipulated over the years. Funds intended for community programs had quietly disappeared. Records had been altered. Signatures had been forged. No massive criminal empire, no dramatic conspiracy. Just years of small, dishonest choices growing into something much larger. And at the center of it all stood Darren Mills. When the evidence became undeniable, city officials scheduled a formal hearing. The news shook the department. Officers who had defended Mills suddenly became quiet. Others felt betrayed. Many simply struggled to accept it. Because Darren Mills wasn't some outsider. He had worked beside them for years, attended their weddings, helped train younger officers, shared meals and memories. The truth hurt precisely because it involved someone they knew. The night before the hearing, Nia remained at the station long after everyone else had left. Stacks of files covered her desk. Reports, statements, evidence, the tools of accountability. Yet she felt no satisfaction, only sadness. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." The door opened. To her surprise, it was Jenna Morales. She carried 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this." Nia accepted one gratefully. "You always seem to show up at the right time." Jenna smiled. "I learned from watching you." For a moment, they sat in comfortable silence. Then Jenna looked around the office. "You know, things are different here now." Nia raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" "People talk more openly." Jenna thought for a moment. "They seem less afraid. The words stayed with Nia after Jenna left. Because leadership isn't always measured by victories. Sometimes it's measured by what people finally feel safe enough to say. The hearing took place the following morning. City officials filled the room. Department leaders sat along one side. Community representatives occupied the back rows. Nia arrived early. She wasn't there to celebrate. She was there because responsibility demanded it. When Darren Mills entered, the room grew noticeably quieter. He looked older than she remembered, not physically, emotionally. The confidence that once surrounded him seemed diminished. The evidence was presented carefully, methodically. Hours passed. Documents were reviewed. Witnesses spoke. Questions were answered. And little by little, the truth became impossible to deny. By late afternoon, the decision was reached. Mills would be terminated. Further legal action would follow. The announcement felt strangely quiet. No applause, no cheers, just silence. The silence of people realizing that choices have consequences. As everyone began leaving, Nia gathered her papers. She expected relief. Instead, she felt something else. Grief. Not for what happened, for what could have been. A voice interrupted her thoughts. "Captain." She turned. Darren Mills stood several feet away. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Mills nodded toward an empty corner of the room. "Can we talk?" Nia hesitated. Then she agreed. They walked away from the crowd. The room around them slowly emptied. Mills stared at the floor for several seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded tired. "I kept telling myself it wasn't that bad." Nia listened quietly. At first, it was small things. His eyes remained fixed on the ground. One shortcut. A pause. Then another. He swallowed. Eventually, I stopped seeing the line. The honesty surprised her. Not because it excused anything, because it sounded real. Human beings rarely wake up planning to become the worst version of themselves. More often, they drift there, one compromise at a time. Mills looked up. "I blamed everybody else." His voice cracked slightly. "The department. The city. My supervisors." A bitter smile crossed his face. "Anybody except myself." Nia remained silent. Some moments needed space. Finally, Mills reached into his pocket. He removed a folded photograph. The image looked old, worn, much like the one Nia carried of her father. "My daughter." Nia accepted the picture. A teenage girl smiled back from the photograph. Mills stared at it. "She stopped talking to me 6 months ago." The confession came unexpectedly. "I told myself she didn't understand." His eyes filled with tears. "Truth is, she understood better than I did." For the first time, Nia saw not a lieutenant, not a subject of investigation, just a man facing the wreckage of his own decisions. The moment carried no triumph, only sadness and understanding. When humans fail, the damage rarely stops with them. Families carry it too. Before leaving, Mills looked directly at her. "You were right." Nia shook her head gently. This wasn't about being right. Mills nodded. Perhaps for the first time, he understood. Weeks passed. The department slowly began healing. New financial controls were introduced. Policies changed. Training improved. But the biggest change wasn't written in any handbook. It lived in the people. Officers began speaking up when something felt wrong. Questions were encouraged. Concerns were addressed. Trust, once damaged, slowly returned. One afternoon, Nia walked through the station and noticed something unexpected. Laughter. Real laughter. Not nervous, not forced, just people enjoying one another's company. The atmosphere felt lighter, healthier, the kind of place her father would have admired. Later that evening, Lawson knocked on her office door. "You got a minute?" "Sure." He stepped inside carrying a folder, the latest community satisfaction report. Nia opened it. Her eyes widened. Public trust numbers had increased significantly. Community complaints had fallen. Volunteer participation had risen. The department wasn't just functioning better. People believed in it again. Lawson smiled. "You did that." Nia looked at the report, then shook her head. No. She thought of Jenna, Walter, the honest officers who stepped forward, the residents who refused to lose faith. "We did that." Lawson smiled, and this time there was genuine respect behind it. Not because of her title, because of who she had proven herself to be. If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. As Lawson left, Nia looked through her office window. The sun was beginning to set. Golden light stretched across the parking lot. The crisis was over. The department had survived. Yet one small piece of the story remained unfinished. Because later that week, Nia would receive a letter that had been sitting unopened for nearly 20 years. A letter connected to her father. A letter that would bring one final lesson she never expected to receive. The letter arrived on a quiet Thursday afternoon. At first, Nia almost ignored it. The envelope sat among reports, budget requests, and routine paperwork stacked neatly on her desk. It looked ordinary, slightly yellowed with age. Her name was written across the front, in careful handwriting she didn't recognize. What caught her attention was the return address. There wasn't one. She turned the envelope over. The seal had already begun to loosen with time. For reasons she couldn't explain, her heart started beating a little faster. Outside her office window, officers moved through the station, carrying on with their day. Phones rang. Conversations drifted through the hallways. Life continued normally. Yet for Nia, everything seemed to pause. She carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single folded letter and a photograph. The photograph showed her father standing beside another officer outside an old precinct building. Both men looked young. They were smiling at something beyond the camera. Nia stared at the image. She had never seen it before. Slowly, she unfolded the letter. The handwriting was neat, but slightly shaky. "Dear Nia, you don't know me, but I knew your father. My name is Samuel Carter. 40 years ago, I was a rookie officer who nearly destroyed his own career." Nia settled deeper into her chair and continued reading. The words seemed to pull her backward through time. Samuel explained that during his first year as an officer, he had made a serious mistake. Not a crime, not corruption. Fear. A moment of panic during a difficult situation. Nobody had been hurt, but the incident could have ended his career. He expected punishment, humiliation, maybe even termination. Instead, her father had asked him to sit down. Samuel described that conversation in vivid detail. "Your father listened more than he spoke. He didn't excuse my mistake. He didn't pretend it wasn't serious. But he also didn't treat me like I was beyond saving. He told me something I'll never forget. He said, 'A person's worst day shouldn't always become the rest of their life.'" Nia stopped reading. Her eyes drifted toward the photograph on her desk. That sounded exactly like him. The letter continued. Samuel explained that her father's guidance had changed everything. He learned from the mistake, improved, built a successful career, eventually retired after more than 3 decades of service. Toward the end of the letter, the handwriting became less steady. I recently learned about your promotion. Someone sent me a newspaper article. The moment I saw your name, I thought of your father. I wanted you to know that his kindness continued long after he was gone. You see, people remember awards for a little while. They remember titles for a little while. But they remember compassion for the rest of their lives. Nia felt a lump rise in her throat. The station around her faded into the background. The final paragraph was short. I suspect you've spent your career wondering whether you're making a difference. You are. The proof isn't always visible when you're doing the work. Sometimes it appears years later in the life of a stranger. Thank you for carrying forward what your father started. Samuel Carter. For several moments, Nia simply sat there. The room felt very quiet. Not lonely, peaceful. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. Walter stepped into the office. One look at her face, and he immediately noticed something. You okay? Nia smiled softly. Yeah. She held up the letter. I think I just got a message from the past. Walter sat across from her while she explained. When she finished, he nodded slowly. Sounds like your father. Nia laughed through damp eyes. Yeah. Walter glanced toward the photograph. You know what's funny? What? The people who leave the biggest mark rarely know they're doing it. The observation stayed with her because it felt true. Her father had never known about this letter, never knew that a frightened young officer would remember a single conversation for 40 years. Just as Nia probably didn't know how many lives she had quietly touched herself. That weekend, the department hosted a community picnic in a local park. Families arrived carrying folding chairs and homemade food. Children played games on the grass. Music drifted through the warm afternoon air. It wasn't a major event, just neighbors spending time together. The kind of gathering that reminds people they're connected. Nia moved through the crowd, greeting families and shaking hands. Near one of the picnic tables, a young officer introduced her to an elderly woman. The woman studied Nia for a moment, then smiled warmly. You probably don't remember me. Nia laughed. I'm afraid that's possible. My husband wandered away from home last year. Recognition appeared immediately. The confused elderly man she had helped during her first week. The woman's eyes brightened. He talks about you all the time. Nia smiled. How is he doing? Much better. The woman reached out and squeezed her hand. You treated him with dignity when he needed it most. There was that word again. Dignity. The same thing her father had taught her. The same thing she tried to give every person she met. The woman eventually walked away. But the moment lingered. One small act, one ordinary day, a life touched in a way she never fully understood. As evening approached, families began heading home. The park slowly emptied. Golden sunlight stretched across the grass. Nia found herself sitting alone on a bench overlooking a small pond. Children's laughter echoed faintly in the distance. The world felt calm. A few minutes later, Lawson joined her. Neither spoke immediately. Old friends often don't need to. Finally, Lawson nodded toward the sunset. Quite a journey. Nia smiled. That's one way to describe it. Lawson chuckled. You know, when you first arrived, I thought I had you figured out. Nia laughed. I know. I'm glad I was wrong. She looked toward the fading sunlight. So am I. For a while they simply sat there, watching the sky change colors. The crisis, the investigation, the conflict, all of it felt farther away now. Not forgotten, just transformed into something useful. A lesson, a reminder, proof that integrity still mattered. Eventually, Lawson stood. "I should get going." Nia nodded. After he left, she reached into her bag. The old photograph of her father rested inside. Alongside it sat Samuel's letter. Past and present, side by side. For a long moment, she held them both. Then she looked out across the water. The surface reflected the evening sky like glass. She thought about the officers who had changed, the department that had healed, the community that trusted them again. The father whose lessons continued shaping lives long after his own story had ended. And she realized something simple. Leadership was never about rank, never about authority, never about being the most important person in the room. It was about leaving people better than you found them. One conversation, one act of kindness, one honest decision at a time. As darkness slowly settled over the park, Nia slipped the photograph and letter safely back into her bag and began walking home. Not as the woman who had won a battle, not as the captain who fixed a department, but as a daughter who finally understood the true meaning of the legacy she had inherited. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more stories like this. Thank you for spending this time with us. And as Nia disappeared into the soft evening light, carrying the lessons of the past toward the future, the world felt a little kinder, a little wiser, and beautifully at peace. Like the final page of a beloved book gently closing.